Judgment Day in Brussels for the leaders of Catalonia's independence movement. But if Spain's separatists are sent home, will they get a fair trial? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is the extradition trial of Carles Puigdemont. He led the charge for independence. He failed, and now the Spanish government wants him locked up. Catalonia's sacked leader and 4 former ministers are due to appear before a Belgian court on Friday to hear Spain's case for extradition. If sent back, the group could face charges including sedition and rebellion. But would Madrid give them a fair trial? Carles Puigdemont doesn't think so. He says Spain is conducting a brutal judicial offensive against him and members of his ousted government. So, should he be forced to return? Randolph Nogel reports.
A l'estat espanyol així no pot continuar. A la comunitat europea deixi de mirar a un altre costat. A tots els demòcrates del món, dient-los que hi ha un poble dempeus, digne.
A leader in exile addresses his people. And while Carles Puigdemont now holds no official position, after Madrid dissolved his government, thousands of his supporters continue to flood the streets of Barcelona. They're testament to the fact that the battle for Catalan independence is far from over. Puigdemont fled Spain's northeastern region for Brussels, the capital of the EU. He's wanted on charges of sedition, rebellion, and misuse of public funds, all related to the independence referendum and vote for secession held by his government last month. Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy's government has put Catalonia under direct rule. Something Puigdemont and other separatist leaders say is illegal.
Un gobernante no puede decir que la Constitución no rige en su territorio. Un gobernante no puede inventar una legalidad paralela, que es lo que hemos visto en los últimos tiempos. Un gobernante no puede declarar unilateralmente la independencia de una parte del territorio nacional.
Now a Brussels court will decide whether to extradite Puigdemont and 4 of his former ministers. 9 former ministers of his government who remained in Spain were sent to prison by a judge, pending an investigation. This latest chapter of Catalonia's political saga is unfolding outside its borders. While the next will be Catalan elections in December, Madrid will be hoping unionist parties prevail. If they don't, Madrid could find its constitutional foundation for a unified Spain in even greater danger. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Barcelona is Francesc Bellavista. He's the National Secretary of the Catalan National Assembly. Also in Barcelona, we have Juan Rivadulla. He is a member of the Business Association Entrepreneurs of Catalonia. And we have Peter Klepp. He's the head of the Brussels office for EU policy think tank Open Europe. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Juan, let me begin with you. What do you want to happen to Carles Puigdemont? Do you want him extradited, tried for treason? Is that what you want?
No, I don't want him to be in prison. I want him to face his responsibilities as any citizen in Spain would do. So I think he has committed some felonies. He has clearly violated the Catalan laws, the Spanish laws, and now he needs to face his responsibilities as in any democracy.
Juan, do you believe that he will get a fair trial back in Spain, given that Madrid has cracked down so hard on the Catalan leaders for going ahead with that vote?
Obviously, he would get a fair trial. Spain, according to all the international organizations, the EU, the UN, the international, all the international organizations, the World Bank, they all claim that Spain is a full democracy. So there is no doubt that Mr. Puigdemont will face a fair and just trial in Spain. In Spain, we have separation of powers, and the judicial power is independent in Spain, and he will get his fair trial.
Francesc Bellavista, if he's extradited, nothing to worry about. He will get a fair trial. He'll have an opportunity to state his case. What do you think?
Well, I don't think he will face or have a fair trial Actually, he is charged with rebellion and sedition, among other offenses. And these offenses, they imply violence, and there has been no violence whatsoever in Catalonia in the independence process last month. So it is very difficult to accept these charges. And as we have seen with other 8 members of the Catalan government who are now in jail, charged with the same offenses, they had only 24 hours after they received notice of the charges to prepare their defense. They faced the judge. When their legal counsel was pleading the defense, the judge was just looking at her telephone and send them to jail immediately without bail. I don't think this is a fair trial, and I understand that legitimate President Puigdemont now in Brussels is worried about having a fair trial in Spain, where there is a clear lack of judicial independence, as it is said in reports from the Council of Europe.
Let me bring in Peter Klepp. It's interesting that Mr. Puigdemont decided to go to Brussels. He's there. That's where the corridors of power of the EU are. If they weren't paying attention, they definitely are now, because the man's in the city. Tell me how worried they would be, given that they're trying to keep the European Union together. They don't want one of their major players to break apart, but on the other hand, they don't also want violence and so on. Tell me how worried they might be.
Well, indeed, Puigdemont is here in Brussels to make sure that the Catalan cause gets some more attention. And as a result of that, the Spanish government has issued a European arrest warrant, which will have to be judged by a Belgian judge tomorrow. This Belgian judge, in theory, is not allowed to look at whether the criminal acts are actually proven or not. But what he can do is to say that the criminal acts that Puigdemont is alleged to have committed are actually not criminal in Belgium, which would be a reason to deny the arrest warrant. That's unlikely, I must say. What else can the judge do? He can say that the European arrest warrant actually violates the European Convention of Human Rights because of the lack of judicial independence in Spain. And if you look at certain rankings, it's not so clear at all that this is all fine. At least the European Commission scoreboard, there Spain is not doing great.
Okay.
And even if the judge would say Puigdemont has to be extradited to Spain, the Belgian government can, in theory, deny this, claiming that it would be against the Convention of Human Rights again, but that is very unlikely.
Juan, both the other 2 gentlemen are questioning the judicial independence in Spain, and that's why they're worried about whether Puigdemont will get a fair trial. Make your case again. They've said Spain's not doing too well judicially. They feel that the courts are going to go in line with the Prime Minister Rajoy, who's pretty hawkish on this issue right now.
But again, nationalists, independentists, they spend a great deal of efforts and time trying to discredit the Spanish democracy. But that's their opinion, and I have my own opinion. But let's see what really the international organization think about the democracy of Spain. And again, the European Union, the United Nations, the World Bank, everyone else says that Spain is a full democracy, among the top democracies in the world. So there's not much to discuss about this. They have their own opinion, I have my opinion.
Sure, let me ask you, okay,
at
fair
the
enough.
end of the day...
Okay, but hold on for a second. Let me ask you, Juan. So the separatists lost, right? They declared independence. They failed. They didn't get their state, right? So more than a month down the line, they didn't get their state. The Prime Minister has all this power, but he's still talking tough. Why can't Rajoy be magnanimous? Why can't he be gentle and compassionate now? Because he has all the power now. Why does he want to crush these leaders with charges of rebellion and sedition and so on? I mean, this is putting them in the same category as terrorists. He could face 30 years in jail.
That's our law. So it's not that Rajoy wants to do this. There are laws in Spain, and this gentleman they have breaking this law. So it's not up to Rajoy to see what's going to happen with them. Again, in Spain, we have an independent judicial power. And the prosecutors believe that this gentleman has committed these crimes. So now it's all in the hands of our judicial power. Rajoy cannot do anything now. It's all in the hands of the judge.
Okay, so let's ask Francesc. Okay, let's ask Francesc. So you gambled, you wanted independence, you went ahead with the vote even though Spain said don't do it, even though neighboring countries said don't do it. You failed. As Juan says, this is the law and you have to face the consequences. And in addition to that, you've hurt the economy and you've made a big mess of this. Shouldn't the Catalan leaders be taking some responsibility for this as well?
I don't agree of everything you said, of course. The referendum was banned by the Spanish Constitutional Court. It was unofficial, but it was not violent, it was not a trouble, just letting people vote and express their opinions. That's democracy and that's a free speech. I don't see if the violent repression by the Spanish riot police, I don't think it was necessary. It was absolutely disproportionate. And according to what you say, I don't agree with what you say about the economy in Catalonia. The economy continues to, the economic activity continues to work pretty well. Of course, some companies have moved their headquarters under pressure by the Spanish government, but the business is still there, and the production unions and the workers are still in Catalonia. So there's kind of like a little bit of an image of economic crackdown, which is not true at all. And then, finally, back to your final question. Should the Catalan political leaders like President Puigdemont and the rest of the cabinet face responsibilities? Political responsibilities, always. Every politician. Criminal consequences or responsibilities, I don't see it. I don't think they did any major offense or serious offense.
Let me ask Juan. Let me come in here. Let me just add to it. Let me just add to it, right? And you can sort of fold it into your broader answer, because I think this is very important, because Francesc mentioned police brutality. So I was there on voting day and in the days after. What was interesting is when I was speaking to a lot of young people in Barcelona, a lot of them were on the fence until they came across police beating up voters and protesters, right? So a lot of young people told me, I wasn't sure about whether I wanted to join the Catalonia independence movement or not, but then when I saw our own police, our own forces turn against their own people, I decided we need to have our own country. Keep that in mind, and keep in mind the fact that this is seen as a crackdown now on the political leadership of Catalonia. People possibly going to jail, leaders possibly going to jail for sedition, right? And they could spend decades in jail. Isn't that just going to push more people who weren't in support of independence, who weren't in support of Puigdemont and his plan? Isn't that going to push more of them into the hands of the separatists the harder Madrid cracks down?
Well, to be honest, I don't know what's going to happen. The thing is that this populist nationalist process has fractured the society in two. One day you have 1 million people running the streets of Barcelona with independent flags. The other day you have another 1 million people in Barcelona waving the Spanish and European Union flags. So yes, I mean, both sides have the capability to people on the streets and to put some pressure on the government. But at the end of the day, it's the rule of law. This is a democracy. So we cannot be blackmailed by the nationalists blackmailing us or blackmailing the government, saying that we're going to block the country, we're going to put 300,000 people on the streets protesting. So because the other bloc can also do the same. So at the end of the day, again, I hate to repeat myself, but it's the democracy. We live in a democracy and we live under the rule of law. And this is what it gives us the progress, the stability that we have enjoyed for more than 40 years under the umbrella of the Spanish Constitution.
Peter Klepp, let me bring you in here. Brussels is in a little bit of a bind, isn't it? Because it must support the sovereignty of Spain. It must support Mariano Rajoy. But on the other hand, it doesn't want to see this leader, Puigdemont, going back to Spain, maybe facing trial and possibly being sentenced to 20 or 30 years in prison just because he held a vote, right? Because that would look terribly bad, just as the police beating up protesters looked really bad. So given that Brussels is in such a bind, how does it balance its policy right now?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I do not think it is the job of the European Union to mingle here. You know, the European Union is not a political body, as much as Jean-Claude Juncker has said that it is a political body. It is not a political body. It has no legitimacy to take a stance here. So I think it's wise that the EU has largely stayed out of this. Now, that said, I do think it's good that some national leaders, like for example the Belgian Prime Minister, have clearly said that violence can never be the answer here and there needs to be dialogue. Now, looking at how specifically the party of Rajoy has reacted to the demands for more autonomy and independence, objectively, wherever you stand, you have to admit that his strategy of saying, look, legally we in Spain have the opportunity to overrule you according to our constitution. This is of course legally accurate, that is correct, but it has not stopped the demands for independence. It has only made independence much more popular. Right. His recent actions to send in the riot police against peaceful referendum goers have actually increased the popularity of independence. So I think a change of strategy is needed.
Certainly. Okay, so Peter, let me ask Juan. Juan, he makes a good point, doesn't he? You can keep on saying it's illegal, it's illegal, it's illegal, but the political reality on the ground will change. And people will say, we don't care if it's illegal or not, you're not listening to our voice. Do you accept that Peter makes a good point?
Obviously, I mean, on the next 21st of December, we have elections coming up. The people will speak in a fair election, in a fair election day, not in the self-made referendum that they did a few weeks ago. So on the next 21st of December, we will have a clear opportunity for all the people in Catalonia to speak up and to really say whatever they want to say and to claim in whatever position they want to be. So yes, 21st of December, it's a big day for Catalonia, and I hope that all the people that has been silenced and silent over this last 5 years will speak up that day.
Okay, Francesc Bellavista, December 21st. Are you looking forward to that day? And is it an opportunity for you to reinvigorate your project?
Yes and not. Of course, this we consider it as a illegitimate snap election because it was called by Prime Minister Rajoy, not by the Catalan President and the Catalan Parliament.
Yeah, but you guys called for an election without his permission, right? So now you know how it feels.
That's it. Okay, we accept that election. I'm not belonging to a political party. I do belong to a grassroots organization from the civil society. And the problem we're facing with this snap election for the 21st December is that it is called, but some people who would be candidates, opponents of Mr. Rajoy views, are in jail. How can you hold an election while you have your opponents in jail? It doesn't seem, or it doesn't look quite democratic, these elections. But, of course, we will do our best with the candidates. Actually, the president of my organization, Catalan National Assembly, today he confirmed that he is going to be a candidate, stand as candidate for this election, together as number 2 in the list of President Puigdemont, Together for Catalonia. But he will do that from jail.
Right. Okay, let me ask
we
one.
We will do our best.
Good
I'm
point.
sure. I'm sure that the Catalan pro-independence movement has won the last elections in the last several years, and I think we will get that victory on the ballot boxes.
Okay.
and show to Spain and Europe and the world that we stand first for democracy and then for our self-rule as a self-determined people.
Okay, I've got to wrap in 30 seconds, but I want to ask you, Juan, very briefly, please, isn't it a good point that it's an uneven playing field when the leadership are in jail and there's an election in the region at the same time?
It's quite bizarre, it's quite strange to hold an election this way, but this is the situation that they have put themselves into. I mean, they broke the law, they have to face the consequences. Now if they want to be elected in these elections, and now they are in jail because a judge, a democratic judge, has sent them to jail, this is the situation. I mean, it's not Rajoy that wanted this situation, it's themselves that have put themselves into this situation. What can we do? Okay,
we'll be covering that vote and its aftermath on December 21st. Gentlemen, I've got to move on. It's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Francesc Bellavista, Peter Klepp and Juan Rivadulla. Thank you for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still ahead on the Newsmakers, the US finds itself increasingly alone as other world leaders strive to end climate change. And Cambodia dissolves its main opposition party. We ask one of its members what their future holds. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Leaders from around the world are in the German city of Bonn for the annual UN Climate Conference. Something they're all debating is how to best implement the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. But one nation that stands out, or stands alone, is the United States. The world's second largest polluter said it was pulling out of the agreement in June, sparking criticism that the Trump administration is failing in its responsibility to the international community. So, should they be doing more to save the planet? Vanessa Keneally takes a look.
It's a country raging towards 7 years of war, where hundreds of thousands of people have died and millions have been displaced. And yet Syria still found time to sign the Paris Agreement on climate change. That means every nation on Earth has now signed or ratified the pact. But there's one country that's also the biggest polluter in history, which says it's leaving, and that's the United States. On August the 4th, President Donald Trump officially informed the United Nations he was pulling out of the climate agreement unless there was more in it for Americans, following up on a promise he's repeatedly talked about throughout his first year in power.
Foreign leaders in Europe, Asia, and across the world should not have more to say with respect to the U.S. economy than our own citizens and their elected representatives. Thus, our withdrawal from the agreement represents a reassertion of America's sovereignty.
But for those who have gathered in Germany this week for the UN's COP23 summit in Bonn, there's nothing to applaud.
Climate change is pretty much not up for discussion. There is not enough attention. We now have the climate conference and we must bring some attention. That is urgently necessary.
Also in Germany this week are 5 US senators who say they will not let America renege on the promise made in Paris in December 2015. They're all members of a coalition called We Are Still In, which represents states, cities, universities and environmental activists in America.
President Trump has one vision, which is to double down on fossil fuels. But Grassroots America has quite a different vision, and Grassroots America is winning, leaving us on track to meet our 2020 goals as promised in Paris.
We're seeing the shift all across the United States with tax credits. Solar and wind prices are dropping and are now cheaper than coal in many places. Clean energy is growing at a record pace, making up nearly 2/3 of all electric facilities built in 2015. And this year, even under this administration, wind had its best quarter since 2009.
But are these small gains actually going to make any difference to the planet? The main goal of the Paris Agreement is to slow down the average global temperature to below 2 degrees Celsius. If this doesn't happen, scientists believe extreme weather conditions will be irreversible. And even if countries don't meet their goals, there really isn't any legal structure in place for punishing them. But since the Paris Agreement is the first time all of the world's leaders have actually been able to come to the table to try and find a solution, is it simply a case of a bad plan being better than no plan at all? Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from the UN summit in Bonn by US State Senator Mike Barrett. He serves as the chairman of the Legislative Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities and Energy. Also in Bonn, but from a rival climate skeptic wing of the summit, we have Marc Morano. He's a former Republican political aide and the communications director of the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. Marc Morano, let me ask you, you're at a climate summit, but you're promoting fossil fuels. I mean, come on, that's like promoting Budweiser at an AA meeting, isn't it? Why are you doing that?
Well, you know, it's funny. Last year I had a cardboard cutout of Trump, and the delegates here at the UN and the activists reacted as though they were vampires to a cross. So I'm here because there's no one else here to do it. President Trump's message is one of sane energy policy and a rational scientific policy. The United States is leading the world by being opposed to the UN Paris Agreement. We are proudly standing alone. Goodbye, Syria. Goodbye, Nicaragua. The United States is doing it all alone the way true leadership should be done.
Okay, so Senator Mike Barrett, what's interesting is that Marc Morano represents...
I got hecklers here in the background.
Marc Morano represents the view of...
I got hecklers here in the media center.
Oh, I can hear, no doubt. Let me ask the senator. Senator Mike Barrett, so Marc Morano represents what the commander-in-chief believes here and what the Trump administration does. So even though the US is an outlier when it comes to the other 194 countries that signed the Paris Agreement, you as an American there at the summit are not representing your nation's views. How do you feel about that?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question that some have raised in a profound way. It's not really clear, given our federal system, where cities and states have enormous power, and of course we have conservative philosophers to thank for having reinforced that point of view. It's not really clear who speaks for the country right now. President Trump does stand alone, as Mark mentioned, but that wasn't his original plan. He thought that he was going to proclaim that the U.S. is out and see other nations respect his point of view and follow. Nobody's followed. He stands alone not by choice, but because the other countries of the world have preferred to ally with the cities and states that are still in.
Let me ask you, Marc Morano, let me ask you what the fundamental driver of this is. I often go back to that 2012 tweet by Donald Trump where he says that climate change is a Chinese hoax to destroy the US manufacturing industry. Do you sincerely believe that nonsense?
No, in fact, Donald Trump has said he was joking about that tweet. If you really want to know what Donald Trump's views on climate change are, you would look right after the election in the New York Times editorial board meeting. He actually talked about his uncle, who was a scientist, and the ClimateGate emails, and his skepticism generally of the United Nations agenda and the consensus. And actually, Donald Trump's views in that regard were very in line with climate skeptics. The Chinese hoax thing was literally a joke to be, and the agenda-wise, he may not have been joking, but he was joking when that tweet. The important thing here is Donald Trump stands with science. In the journal Nature, almost every single industrialized country is not on track to meet the targets, even if they were, according to peer-reviewed literature. Bjorn Lomborg, the statistician, has pointed this out. Even if you believe UN models and UN assumptions on the science, you would have essentially the same temperature 100 years from now that we have now, assuming the UN is correct. In other words, it's a massive redistribution of wealth, global governance, central planning, turning over sovereignty to achieve nothing on the climate if you believe the UN.
Okay, so
and
Mark,
it's the most expensive treaty in history.
So
Donald Trump is correct.
Okay, so let me ask you, Mark, and before I bring the senator back in, let me ask you, I
hope I said enough there.
Forget that people are failing to implement it in the way that you would like it to be implemented. You see it as this kind of leviathan trying to kind of take control of everybody's energy policies. Park that aside for a second. But doesn't it give you pause for concern when 194 other countries have decided to go it another way? They recognize that the Earth is warming, the climate is changing, and that we might be responsible for this. And 97% of peer-reviewed studies suggest that this is the case. When that happens, don't you think, hey, hold on, maybe there are scientists who know better than I do when it comes to this thing?
No, first of all, the 97%, you might get that result in a North Korean election, but you're not getting that in the scientific community. And that's been proven to be nonsense. One of the UN scientists said it was actually pulled from thin air, the claim of 97% scientists agree on global warming. The key here is even if we face the climate catastrophe, what the UN has proposed would have no impact. And the idea is the UN cannot legislate weather and climate. The senator here has said that carbon pricing is the single most important thing we can do to fight global warming. Carbon pricing harkens back to the idea, Massachusetts had to deal with this, the witchcraft trials. The idea is witches change the weather.
Okay.
Now they're claiming SUVs and our coal plants are changing the weather.
But just for clarity,
and most of the judges were educated at Harvard, as the
so
senator
just for clarity,
was as
the
well.
97% comes from a study from 1991 to 2011. 97% of peer-reviewed studies concluded that the climate is changing and we're responsible for it. These are not my words. I didn't pull it out of thin air. Let me bring in Senator Mike Barrett here. Senator Mike, I didn't pull it out of thin air. I used it and I'm sourcing it, right? Senator Mike Barrett. Okay, so the administration believes one thing. It wants to promote fossil fuels. It's skeptical about everybody else trying to get involved here. Tell me why you're there at the summit and how you feel you can make a difference in the face of overwhelming opposition from your federal government.
Well, we do have a federal government rather than a single-tiered government. The states have always had enormous power latitude. Most of the powers not expressly assigned to our national government are reserved for the states. That's our 10th Amendment. We're exercising our 10th Amendment rights, and we're finding a receptive audience throughout the rest of the world. There's a serious issue here about whether President Trump is delegitimizing the federal government in the U.S. He's so outside the mainstream that people are walking away from us. We're losing the moral latitude, the moral authority with which we once spoke to great issues affecting the rest of the planet. And I'd like to remind Mark, and I know he's a good historian, that Republicans, as well as Democrats after World War II, were united in the idea that the U.S. was part of a greater world. We were going to exercise leadership, but always in concert with other countries. President Trump is walking away from 60 years of bipartisan Republican and Democratic commitment to the idea of the U.S. leading, but working in concert with the rest of the world. That desertion of that bipartisan consensus is nothing to make jokes about, and it's nothing to be proud of.
So, Mark, what's more likely, that President Trump is right, or Xi Jinping, Emmanuel Macron, Justin Trudeau, Angela Merkel, the UN chief, and all of them are wrong? You believe they're all wrong?
Not only are they wrong, but even if they're right, what they're proposing is meaningless, and that's the key. We had the former UN chief, Christiana Figueres, actually say, we need a centralized transformation that will make life on planet Earth very different for everyone. That's what Donald Trump is rejecting with the United Nations.
That's your fear
the UN's
of
own
socialism.
leaders have called for this.
But that's your fear of socialism. What about the science that something's happening to the planet and we need to do something?
Right. The science that something's happening is carbon dioxide is not the control knob of the climate, and even the United Nations scientists, when they're pressed, start turning against it. You have people like Richard Toll and a whole series of United Nations scientists, including Japanese scientists and other scientists, who've turned against the organization because it's predetermined science. You only have about 50 or so scientists come out with the conclusion, and then all the other scientists, sociologists, and non-scientific disciplines pile on. And you have the UN chief actually say, Rajendra Pachauri, global warming is my religion. He was the head of the UN science panel. People have a right to be skeptical of the nonsense that comes out of the United Nations.
Let me ask you, Senator Mike Barrett, you've tried a few things in Massachusetts. You put a tax on carbon and other things. Tell me how it's worked, because I want to find out how it's happened on a kind of micro level and see if we can scale it up to see if there's anything that might be acceptable for Mark.
Yeah. Yes, we do. We've already got a carbon price on electric power in Massachusetts. And I can tell you, and again, I want to invoke good old conservative mainstream economics, the same economic principles, by the way, by which Mr. Trump made whatever money he's made. We don't know exactly how much, but he's made some. Those economic and conservative principles say that people respond to market signals. So we put a price on electric power. We have a cap and trade system. And consumption of electric power has gone down, and pollution, the amount of pollution associated with a given unit of electricity has gone way down. So we produce the same amount of electricity just about, much less greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. It's all because we adopted the kind of market-based or market-based mechanisms that the countries here are deciding. And by the way, I want to make a point about Mark's invocation of world government. That's a non-starter. There isn't a single nation here. There may be a few folks running around the hallways, but then Mark is running around the hallway too. The governments here don't believe you're going to move sovereignty up from the national level. They know that the U.S. is going to govern American affairs. The countries around the world are going to govern theirs. The question is whether sovereign governments can cooperate on a problem threatening the entire planet. We ought to be able to cooperate without sacrificing sovereignty. When the President of the United States jeers at the idea of cooperation that's won bipartisan support ever since the 1940s, we are in trouble. But the truth is that because the U.S. is a federal system, the federal government doesn't speak for us alone. Cities have a voice, states have a voice, we're still in, President Trump is out. Somehow, we're managing to move ahead without him. We miss him.
So Mark,
but we're going to move ahead without him.
Yeah, Mark, they made some changes in Massachusetts. It didn't turn into Animal Farm. There isn't this major, they haven't plunged everybody's living standards back into an agrarian age, right? Smart, simple, science-based policies. Why can't you see that happening on a global scale?
Well, first of all, you can have all sorts of energy policies, and I'm not against wind, solar. I always argue the day people can go to their local Walmart and buy a solar panel, put it on their roof, and get off the grid and tell the coal company and gas company to buzz off is the day this whole climate policy debate ends. It's about the senator selling his bill, I think it's S-1821, as the greatest effort to combat global warming that Massachusetts can do. It's nonsense. EPA regulations don't even affect global emission levels of CO2. UN treaties don't even significantly affect it to the point where the temperature is even going to be affected 100 years out, according to peer-reviewed statements. So his policy of controlling the weather through carbon taxes is about as effective as the witch trials were in Massachusetts in the 16th and 17th centuries. It's not going to affect climate or the weather, but it's the way he's selling it. It's scientifically incorrect to claim that Massachusetts can impact global temperature or weather.
Senator Mike Barrett?
Well, Mark, I'm not going to hire you to write my press releases. I can see we have a difference of opinion here, although I want to give you a lot of credit for your eloquence, even on behalf of something as wrong-headed as this. You are a gifted communicator. You're sending out a message that has zero credibility, though, across the world. Take Massachusetts, for example. We've got one of the lowest unemployment rates. We've got one of the healthiest state GDP rates of any of our 50 states, by the way, healthier than all but a few states that voted for Mr. Trump. Somehow, the blue states of the United States, which are the most prosperous states, the states that have this economic growth thing figured out, have also figured out that we can have that consonant with fighting climate change. That's a pretty good twofer. And I would gently challenge you to point to a cluster of red states where the unemployment rate is as good as California's or as Massachusetts, even though we have carbon pricing, fighting policies in place as well.
Mark, I know you feel a lot like, I guess, Galileo in front of the Inquisition in that building right now, but has there been anything that you've heard during your time in Bonn that has made you question your climate skepticism? Being a skeptic means that you should be skeptical of your skepticism as well. Has there been anything that has convinced you otherwise?
No, in fact, I've come to most of these UN conferences. I've come every year since 2002 when they had one. It was the Earth Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. No, actually, it's the other way around. Listening to the UN proclamations, listening to the UN chief, listening to them do the same sort of, they'll actually state, the head of the IPCC, the alleged science panel, which is it's actually a political body that masquerades as science, has actually said, wait till you see the next report. It'll be so alarming, the world will have to act. That's not the words of science. That's the words of politics trying to use a science, masquerading as science to influence policy. And every time I look behind the curtain here at the United Nations, you get more and more skeptical. This is kind of like, you know, this is the Wizard of Oz and we pulled the curtain back. The UN is a political body, and this is all politics. Don't mix it with actually having an impact on temperature, climate, weather. That's where the nonsense comes in. And I will point out, Senator Mike was actually educated at Harvard. Most of the judges during the Salem witch trial were also educated at Harvard when they were sentencing the women to death. So we've had incidences of this kind of silliness before. That witch could control the weather. Now they think our SUVs control the weather. We have not advanced, sadly.
That is the third time you've invoked the Salem witch trials in this conversation. Senator Mike Barrett, given that the U.S. is an outlier, and again, I think my count, I don't know if my count is correct, but 194 other countries all signed up to the Paris Accord. Even Nicaragua and Syria finally, came on board. The U.S. is that outlier. Mark sees it as a badge of honor. Others are embarrassed by it. We go out to an international audience in the English language around the world as a state senator in Massachusetts at the conference as an American. What is your message about climate change and climate policy to that international audience? Senator Mike Barrett, go ahead.
Well, I'd want an international audience to realize that much of the United States, not enough, but much of the United States is still in and is working in cooperation with other countries. I would also want internationalists to know, and I would want Mark to appreciate, that one can have criticisms of the United Nations and still believe wholly in the need for international cooperation. If the UN didn't exist to convene this meeting, we would have had to invent it, because the need to cooperate to fight a common threat would have been there, even if the institutional system of governance somehow had to be created from scratch. This is not a meeting where you need to buy in to any particular international body. This is a getting together, a gathering, where you can believe very strongly in national sovereignty and also believe that each nation must cooperate with its neighbor. That's what we're looking for here. Not to ratify any particular system of international adjudication or international government, but instead to say nations are presented with a common threat. A great many members of the United States, a great many citizens believe it. A majority, actually, of American citizens agree with us, not with the current president. We want to see international cooperation prevail, but we're not here to protect or to defend any particular system of governance for other purposes. What we've got to do is to work with people from around the globe to make sure that all of us are alive, healthy, prospering, and well 50 years from now. And we can do that, and we can still make room for skeptics. People of Mark's convictions will still have a comfortable place, but most of us will have moved on, and we will have recognized that we've got to fight this climate change issue.
Okay, gentlemen, I've got to move on. I really enjoyed that, and I appreciate you both taking the time to talk to us from the summit. A state senator in Massachusetts, Mike Barrett, and Mark Morano, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Democracy is really facing a great challenge, and time is up for democracy. How long can the international community wait? By waiting, you play the game of Mr. Hun Sen.
The saying goes, if you can't beat them, join them. But there's a third option that critics say Cambodia's Prime Minister has opted for, simply getting rid of them. The country's Supreme Court has dissolved the opposition, Cambodia's National Rescue Party. After its leader Kem Sokha was jailed and charged with treason, Prime Minister Hun Sen called on the court to disband the party. Now the Prime Minister's biggest political threat has been eliminated, but Hun Sen says next year's elections will go ahead as planned. Rights groups say it won't be a fair vote, and Kem Sokha's number 2 has called it the death of democracy. So what does the future now hold for the opposition? Well, to answer that, I'm joined by Monavithya Kem in Washington, D.C. She's the Deputy Director General of Public Affairs for the now dissolved Cambodia National Rescue Party. She's also the daughter of jailed opposition leader Kem Sokha. Monavithya, good to have you on the Newsmakers once again. Is it the end for your party?
Thank you for having me.
Now that it's been dissolved, is it over?
It's definitely not over, and the decision to dissolve the CNRP was expected. It's expected. It's Hun Sen shifting the goalpost. If you remember correctly, over 2 months ago, we were all saying that the arrest of Kem Sokha was the red flag. I'm sorry, was the red line, and now the red line is the dissolution of the CNRP altogether from existence. And I believe that what needs to happen next is needs to be individual sanctions happening to the individuals that are responsible for the crackdown. There needs to be visa ban, financial sanction on these individuals. So statement alone cannot do right now. The international community need to act. And I think so far they have taken the wrong approach. Instead of preempting a move, they are reacting to the move after the damage already happened. And some of the damages are permanent.
But it's interesting that they accuse Kem Sokha and the party of collusion with the United States in trying to enact a color revolution. Wouldn't sanctions just play into their hands now, and they can say, you see, we told you, America and the West are trying to unseat us, and they're trying to get rid of your democratically elected government. Won't they spin it like that?
It doesn't matter how they spin it. They don't have an audience. Both inside and outside the country, people see it for what it is, which is Hun Sen is afraid of a free, fair election, and he is getting rid of the opposition party and leaders.
Any updates?
So, and I think
So let me just come in there. My apologies. Any updates on the status of your father? Because we heard a few weeks ago the judge saying that they will extend his incarceration. Any recent updates?
My mother visited him a few times a week. He is in good spirit. He's encouraged by all the statements by the international community calling for his release, and he believes that his sacrifices will not be lost, and that solution can be reached soon. He will be questioned by the investigating judge, I believe, for the second time on November 24th.
And so you have your father incarcerated. You have you and others in Washington, D.C. There are these protests in the diaspora. Sam Rainsy is on the outside as well. Tell me what your plan is to try and fight back, given that you're sort of disparate and all over the world.
Well, I think there are two key stakeholders here. One is the international community, and the other is obviously the Cambodian people ourselves. So we can do very little inside Cambodia, as you saw today. A lot of our members cannot even move, literally. Some of them can't even leave their house. Some of them can't even travel because of the severe crackdown and monitoring from the authority. So then what can be done outside? For the last 2 months since I last spoke to you, I have been in Brussels and in Washington, D.C., urging the international community to not only express concern to the Cambodian government, but also to express the repercussion, to communicate the repercussion of what would happen if the current situation is not reversed. And I believe that the Cambodian government understands very well what to follow if the situation is not going to improve or get better. However, I think Hun Sen is very practical and he's very calculating. He is buying time. By him putting more pressure, incurring more damages, the solution would take longer. For example, if the donor were to impose economic sanction, as we know, that would take a while. It won't happen the next week or it won't happen tomorrow. So time is not on our side right now, and we are running out of time. So whatever action the international community need to do, it needs to be immediate. For example, the first thing that the international community can do, in particular the EU, the US, Japan, and Australia, is to issue a statement that they withdraw from the electoral assistance in Cambodia and that the election is now already pronounced not free and fair. That's the first thing that they can do that will not hurt the Cambodian people and that will be effective. And number two, again, it's individual sanction. It's both in the form of visa and financial sanction. And I think those alone, if they act soon, would be able to salvage the situation. But we are running out of time. If things do not happen by the end of this year, there's absolutely cannot be enough time for the CNRP to prepare for the July election next year.
For Cambodians who want to take to the polls next year in that election, will they be wasting their time?
They will not go to the poll if CNRP is not on the ballot.
Are you certain of that?
I am certain for at least the 3 million people that voted for the Cambodian, for our party last year and this year. I mean, in 2013 and this year.
Yeah, I mean, and as things have unraveled, they've dissolved the party. Your father's in jail. People are in exile. People have restrictions on movement. There's a fear. You know, rights groups are saying Hun Sen is showing strong dictatorial qualities. Looking back for a second, has the CNRP done anything to give the ruling party the idea that you might have wanted to be a part of a color revolution? Because, you know, they've got charges against your father. They believe that you were colluding with the West. Are there any actions that you regret that have led us to this point?
Absolutely not. Their accusation is cynical, it's baseless, and they themselves do not believe that there's color revolution or there's any plan for color revolution. The reason why they have started the crackdown is because of this June election result in the local election, where we made unprecedented gain and we took power over the grassroots level in local government, and that's what really scared them. And if the trend continued, that would project a victory for the CNRP in 2018, and that's the reason why they are cracking down on us. And all of this invention, for example, the invention of colluding with a foreign power, whether that's the US or any other country, it is precisely designed to stop us from asking from international support. It is designed to preempt the international community from speaking out when they crack down on us. So basically, Hun Sen defines the rule. What is democracy? What is color revolution? But if the West, if the international community, if we live by his rule, then we live by the dictatorship rule. Election is considered a revolution to him.
Mona Vidyakem, it's always a pleasure talking to you on the Newsmakers. I thank you very much for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.